One of the weirdest things about this game for me isn't the quirkiness or the zaniness or the offbeat humor. It's the fact that it's just a little bit worse than its predecessor. Westover Loathing had a really smart leveling up system, good encounter design, surprisingly in depth combat, and generally good quest layout and design. This game has arguably better quest and layout design, but less interesting combat and less interesting leveling. And there's other little details that are just a little bit worse, like how the companion system operates or how the familiars function. And it's kind of weird that they decided to take that step back, especially since this is in fact a sequel to Westover Loathing, which itself is a sequel to Kingdom of Loathing, or Kingdom of Loathing. Oh God, the first one, Kingdom. Just strange they went that way with it. It's still solid gameplay. It's just less interesting. And again, it's just like one step worse. And since they had to deliberately do that and go out of the way to do that to remove some of the depth from it, it just makes me go, why? Now, the choices gameplay and the quest design are still solid. In fact, they're so solid that they might be a little bit too solid, if I can share a bit of advice. If you don't have time to play and replay and re-replay this game, get a walkthrough. Because there's a lot of stuff you can do in this game in a lot of different ways. There's usually at least 3 solutions to every single puzzle, area, boss encounter, etc. that you run into. And most of those require some esoteric stuff from all over the place. If you do a full natural playthrough, you will probably feel like you're getting a full experience out of it, but you're not, because there are so many things that you're missing that you don't even know exist. I actually decided after I'd beaten the game to go and look a few things up, just out of curiosity. I was like, oh, because again, for a game like this, obviously I can't do a proper review of it without playing it 5 times in a row, and I don't have time for that. So walkthroughs will have to do for some of the side content. And like I said, there's so many different other elements and things and concepts. I mean, hell, even the vignettes was something that didn't even show up for me until I was in the final chapter, because that's when it triggered for the character I had been using up to that point, because that's the one I've been leveling up to that point. I also assumed quite naturally that leveling up your side characters, your companions, was something that was kind of experience-based, and it sort of is, but also not, because they gain stat ups based on events, which can be triggered in specific areas, based on specific quest interactions, which can be triggered very specifically, or, and this is where I was correct, based on how many encounters you have. Note that encounters does not actually mean enemies, just an encounter. Smart system, if I'm being honest, but you could see how there's so much and so many ways you could do, how easy it would be to just completely skip over something and not realize that it was never even there. Hell, some of this stuff and unlocks in this game specifically unlock per account, so they will be there for you on replay. I should also mention, though, that this is still a fairly tightly and well-designed game when it comes to almost being a Metroidvania. I know that's a weird direction to take that sentence, but I mean it. You start off in an area and it's like, okay, you gotta go do this. Okay, well, what do I need to do this? Well, this other thing. Okay, what do I need to do this other thing. And as you slowly expand the given map you're in, the map itself just kind of slowly starts to like become more and more available, and you get more access to more areas and more things. It's functionally more of a kind of a basic Metroidvania because most of the access is in the form of keys. So you gain fuses, you gain matches. In one case, it was a stick of dynamite. Like, there's lots of different items you can get, and most of them have repeat uses in order to access new areas throughout the course of the game. But someone spent a long time with a lot of pieces of paper mapping out all the charts and options you can do with this game. Now, you notice I've been doing nothing but talking about the gameplay of this game because, as always, gameplay is awesome. These are video games, after all. Narratively, though, I'm not going to talk much about the specifics because that's what the streams are for, but I do want to get into something that really caught my attention narratively on this one. It's not really as much of a parody game as Westover Loathing was. In fact, I would go so far as to say I wouldn't even put this under the humor category under normal circumstances, but I need to clarify that sentence. If you've ever heard a game or a show or a movie or even a book or a comic book described as quirky or zany or just kind of off the wall or silly or whatever, then you probably know what I'm talking about. If you've ever played Earthbound or Undertale, you know what I'm talking about. Well, there are jokes in some of these types of works. They're not really there to be humor. They're there to be humorous. And I know that sounds like an odd distinction, but it is an important distinction when you've studied humor, like I have. The goal is to retain a sort of consistent, light-hearted tone throughout the course of the work, and thus have a general jovial approach for the most part, and then occasionally you'll hit the player or the viewer or the reader with an actual honest-to-goodness joke periodically. And that's the distinction between something, unlike, say, Colonel Sanders' freaking dating sim, that's just straight-up parody. There's no humorous tone there. That's joke after joke after joke. And that's fine. I'm not trying to make any shade throwing or anything. I'm just pointing out the distinction. I'm also apparently fighting a boss fight. Hey, let's scooch ahead here. The reason I make this distinction is because Westover Loathing was far more focused on actual jokes. It still had a narrative and it still had the light tone I mentioned, but it was slanted more that way. Whereas this one is slanted more towards being quirky. And that's fine, because the story itself is probably one of the, let's say, the more interestingly well-written aspects of this game. Just like how the gameplay has gotten weirdly worse, the story has gotten weirdly better than Westover Loathing. There's definitely more narrative threads, more actual focus on characters and what they were doing and how, and most importantly of all, why. Legitimate motivations and development, and there's actual character arcs in this one. One of my favorite little tidbits, and this is only very minorly spoiling, is that in the prologue chapter, there is an absolute crap ton of foreshadowing for the entire rest of the game. Like, if you pay attention, and again, I'm not going to go into details, but if you pay attention, if you on a replay, it's like, oh, and pretty much the whole game is lined out in the prologue, but it's done in a very quiet and very intelligent way. There's lots of foreshadowing, there's lots of proper build-up. And that's true the whole game, too. Again, just like with the mapping out of all the quests and all the routes through them, someone probably spent a very long time mapping out the story. This is especially important since there's a lot of branching narrative here. Some quests cannot happen at all, and some quests can go very wildly different depending on your actions. So mapping all that out had to have been an absolute nightmare for the developers of this game, and definite props to them. I also want to say, as an addendum, this game reminds me, and I have to clarify this sentence, this game reminds me a little bit of Spaceballs. Now, to clarify that, Spaceballs is definitely a parody movie, as opposed to being a quirky movie, so that's not the comparison at all. But the comparison is that Spaceballs would be a good movie even if it wasn't funny. That was actually something that... oh my god, I can't think of his name all of a sudden. Hang on. Mel Brooks. That was something Mel Brooks was always very good at and always very big on when it came to how he approached his movies. They had to be a good movie and then funny. Because if you set out, this is true, and this is, again, study humor. If you set out to make something funny as your first and primary goal, if the humor doesn't land for whatever reason, then it's going to, all of that positivity is going to turn into negative. It's going to be flipped, and now some people are going to be actually pushed away from the work. But if you try to have a solid work underneath the humor, a solid story, solid characters, solid narrative thread, even if it is being done in a parody manner, then there's at least something for people to enjoy while they get to the jokes. It also serves as lowering the barrier to entry to future jokes, because if the first or second or third joke don't land, the fourth and the fifth might, but then the sixth might not, and the seventh might land, and so forth, and so on, right? By having that other extra layer under there, the player has something to do. Is that a cat? The player has something to do and enjoy until they get to a joke that actually lands for them. And that's this game in a nutshell. There is an actual honest-to-God plot here. And I know there was in Westover Loathing as well, but not to this extent and not this well written. Now, I will say this game gets a little bit barragey at times. It was actually extremely wearying to stream because not only did I have to read a huge amount of dialogue, which is always just draining on me, but like imagine reading something for 9 hours a day. But then I had to kind of present it because, you know, I can't just read. I can't just read Spaceballs on stream. That's not going to be funny. I have to present Spaceballs on stream. So this was a uniquely bad game to stream because this was so draining on me. I actually, for the last couple of days as I've been streaming this, I've had to go to bed pretty much as soon as I finish dinner, and my family keeps worrying about me because they're like, oh my god, what's wrong? And I'm like, it's okay. I'm just doing a parody game. And they're like, oh, okay. But for just playing for yourself, I absolutely and highly recommend this. And I guess I don't actually have much else to add. I will say, like I said, worth a replay or two if you enjoy it. Especially try out the different classes and try out different dialogue options as you're going. Oh, and try out different companions too, for obvious reasons. There are also multiple endings in more than one sense of the word. Also, the music's a bop. Hope you've enjoyed. I'll see you next time.